You know, it's really difficult for me to describe more about the term nostalgia without having to repeat myself many times. However, if I can think of one particular video game company that defines that word, it would have to be the British company Traveller's Tales. This company has been pretty well known for making some of the most nostalgic video games in the 90s and early 2000s. Most of them are basically movie tie-in games to Disney and Pixar movies, and others are spin-offs to some of the most popular video game franchises out there. Since this company doesn't get mentioned much for that, it will be the next topic of my retrospective series. So now that you know what to expect, I will talk about the games that they are most known for making, so that means I will not count any racing spin-offs or any other typical spin-off that they aren't known for making. So with that said, I, Zookstar1000, present to you video game series / video game company perspectives, Traveller's Tales. So let's go back and start in the early days. In 1989, Traveller's Tales was found by British computer artist Jonathan Burton in Knutsford, Cheshire in England, and was fully established in 1990. Because this company was notable for making really good 3D effects, they decided to make games for the Sony computer entertainment company Psygnosis, which as of today is now called Studio Liverpool. Their first ever game they developed was Leander, released for the Amiga 500 in 1991. I haven't played Leander, so there aren't many facts for me to talk about it. Then in 1993, they released a video game adaptation of the 1992 movie Bram Stoker's Dracula for the Super Nintendo. However, regardless of what people thought about these games, they weren't really what put Traveller's Tales as a recognisable company. So in 1993, they released their first ever 2D platformer, Pugsy. It's about a small orange alien named, Pugsy, who crash lands on Earth and now has to get back home. But his spaceship is then stolen by a native tribe of raccoons, and he has to get it back. The gameplay for this game is like a mixture of traditional 2D platforming, like jumping on enemies and killing them, and a puzzle game where Pugsy has to find objects to help him with numerous situations. This game has a wide variety of power-ups to obtain as you go along, like increasing Pugsy's hit points, making him go faster, and making him invincible for a short period of time. The idea of having to pick up objects and throwing them to help progress through the game was considered innovative for its time, and this feature would not be used again until games like Max Payne 2 and Half-Life 2 brought it back. If Pugsy is able to finish a level while carrying an object, it will give him different kinds of score points. Like for example, if you exit the level carrying a heart-shaped object, you will obtain an extra life. The game has a total of 57 levels, 16 of them being secret, which can only be unlocked by entering a password, 6 bosses to fight, and 5 tutorial levels. So reception wise, this was a fairly decent start for Traveller's Tales in terms of making their own platform games. A lot of critics and gamers did enjoy the game, but it didn't really rise up to being a success. There was originally meant to be a sequel, and it was to be released for the Super Nintendo, but before the development was complete, it was never released from that point on. So after the release of Pugsy, Traveller's Tales made an agreement with Psygnosis and Disney to make games based on Disney material. Their first idea was a video game starring Mickey Mouse. Originally, the game was supposed to be made for Mickey Mouse's 65th birthday, but since it was only 6 months away, it wasn't enough time for the company to make the full game. So the idea was changed, and instead the concept was Mickey Mouse travelling through time and visit his old memorable cartoons like Steamboat Willie. That game was entitled Mickey Mania. The game is a typical 2D platformer. You take control as Mickey, and the abilities you are given are jumping quite high, stomping on enemies, and if you collect a few marbles scattered in the levels, you can throw them at enemies that you cannot defeat by just stomping. At the end of each level is a boss fight. Even though the first one was kinda disappointing, as you progress through the game they become more intense to fight. There is also a level where you get chased by a moose, which could be an inspiration for the chase levels in Crash Bandicoot. The game's levels do have a lot of challenging platforming and obstacles, so even though this is a Mickey Mouse game, don't think it's not so hard to complete a level, because this game does have a lot of trial and error, and it does have its moments of frustration. However, despite the difficulty, these levels offer a lot of fun, creative and exciting gameplay that makes this one hell of a platformer. However, what I also admire about the levels than just their platforming are the designs. These are probably the best level designs out of the Mickey Mouse games out there, as they capture the sense of Mickey's classic cartoons good. probably on the same league as Epic Mickey. If you played levels like the Mad Doctor and the Moose Chase levels, you can see that Traveller's Tales were quite experts at making 3D effects in 2D side-scrolling games. Usually when you find a 2D game based on a cartoon character, the sprites aren't as well crafted to the original character. But here, the sprites of Mickey, Steamboat Willie, Pete and even the Mad Doctor are very true to the character they're representing. My only gripe with this game, despite the frustration, is that the game only consists of 6 levels, and depending on how good of a gamer you are, you can complete this game in a few hours or less. But despite that, this was definitely a brilliant achievement from Traveller's Tales, and this is where they became a more recognisable company. There was also a port to the PS1 for the game, which was only released in Europe and was renamed Mickey's Wild Adventure. So moving along, in 1995 they made their next 2D platformer, Toy Story, based on the 1995 Pixar movie of the same name. For this game, you take control as Woody and you have the abilities like Woody's pull string, which is used as a whip. With this, you cannot kill your enemies, but you can stun them for a short period of time. This can also help you swing on hooks, remove obstacles in your path, defeat enemies, and fling objects, so pretty much this ability is the only thing you will need to progress through the game. You collect stars throughout the levels, and there's a total of 50 of them in each stage. Collecting all 50 of them will give you an extra life. However, if you manage to collect most of them, you will gain an extra hit point. The game, just like Pugsy and Mickey Mania, has typical 2D platforming levels. However, this game has a lot more variety to its levels compared to the last 2 games made by Traveller's Tales. Sometimes the levels will change genre to suit the theme, like controlling the RC car to knock Buzz out of the window, 2D chasing levels to survive numerous obstacles, a few boss fights here and there, and even a 3D perspective level where you have to find the toy aliens before the timer expires. My problems with the frustrating difficulty in Mickey Mania still remains in this game. In fact, no, scratch that. It is even more frustrating than Mickey Mania. Now that's not to say that the game is impossible to beat, but when you put in levels with tons of obstacles and enemies and the only thing you have to defend yourself is a whip, it really is mind torture. However, even though I don't like this game as much as the last 2 games, it's fairly decent and you could get some enjoyment out of it despite the horrible frustration. Reception-wise, it did good, but there were also some negative reviews from critics, criticising the game for being dull and uninspiring. However, the Sega Genesis version of the game was met with positive feedback because of its use of 3D pre-rendered visuals. And now we move on to 1996, where Traveller's Tales started a second-party collaboration with Sega to make some spin-offs based on Sonic the Hedgehog. The result was Sonic CD, or Sonic 3D Blast as it's called in North America. It's about Dr. Robotnik, who discovers a race of birds called the Flickies, who have the power to travel through large rings. Robotnik decides to capture the Flickies in order for them to use them to search for the Chaos Emeralds. Now it is up to Sonic the Hedgehog to stop Robotnik again and free all of the Flickies. The game is put in an isometric viewpoint in 2D levels with pre-rendered 3D sprites in 2.5D graphics, and Sonic still has his moves from before like the spin dash. The aim of the game is to destroy a number of robots located around each level to free the Flickies. Once you have enough, you will then bring them to a warp ring so you can advance through the levels. However, if you get hit just once, you will lose all of the Flickies and rings that you have collected, and you'll have to collect them all again. With the Flickies though, you can spring higher to reach items that are out of reach to earn continues. The zones of the game consist of 2 normal acts and then a boss at the end, and there are a total of 10 or 15 Flickies in the normal acts, and fighting Robotnik in one of his machines in the boss fights. There are 4 different types of Flickies to collect, and each of them have their own personality. The blue and pink Flickies just fly in a circle waiting to be rescued, the red Flickies, which constantly wander about, and the green Flickies, which have no interest in Sonic whatsoever. If you manage to collect 50 rings, you can then talk to either Tails or Knuckles and they will warp you to a special stage where you have to collect as many rings as you can to collect a Chaos Emerald, which these special stages are probably the easiest out of any Sonic game. When it was released on November 30th, 1996, it only got mixed reception from both critics and fans alike. The praise went to the graphics and music, but the criticism went to the controls and gameplay, so needless to say this wasn't a great start to Traveller's Tales' collaboration with Sega. Well, that's all I have to say in this part about Traveller's Tales. Join me next time, and I'll talk about where they began to make 3D games.